Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to do something a little different today. We're going to go and address everybody with a video rather than take 15-20 minutes to type something out and have you take 2 or 3 minutes to read it. There's just so many things that need to be said today, and probably some things that need to get cleared up, and so people understand where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Many of you probably have been with us for, well, let's say getting close to 3 years. And we've had a lot of success. Unfortunately, with success, you will have those who want to become more than the membership itself. And we saw that last year. We saw some people try and undermine everything that we had done. We were lied to. We were told falsehoods. These people have since moved on. They've tried to form their own groups. Some of those groups are no longer around. Some of those people split within those groups and created another group, and from what I understand, one of those groups is even split. So it was just a really bad thing that happened. But unfortunately, as we grew and success became more imminent, more people wanted to be in the spotlight, which has never been our intention. Our intention has always been to form something that the people of Alberta could speak to, for, and with, and have a party that represented the people of Alberta. None of us that formed this have ever said we wanted to be any part of this in an official capacity. We say time and time again we don't have the experience. And what we're looking for is to build this membership to the point where somebody with experience can see we're serious, step up, and lead the party. At this time, because of all the turmoil that's taken place, it just isn't a really good time for us to be in the middle of a signature drive competing with others. And we just don't want to waste anybody's time. Well, there is one group right now I believe is still collecting signatures. How stable is it? I don't know. I hear from many that they're not happy. The other party seems to have fallen by the wayside. Another party is gone. I never hear from them anymore. So really, at the end of the day, I guess we're the only ones that have stuck around. Unfortunately, as I said last year, about this time, we were out of time. We had to get signatures and be registered last fall, simply because with the 8,000 plus names that come into Elections Alberta, they do verify those names, and that isn't going to happen instantly. That's going to take some time. Once the verification process is done and we receive word, then we would move to needing to set up constituency associations, which again is a smaller duplication of what we've already done. Each person in their own riding would need to get signatures supporting them to run as a candidate. I believe they would have to put up $500 of their own money, find an accountant to run their nonprofit organization, and the process would repeat again. So just getting this party registered is half the work. The work that comes after it is where it really begins. Unfortunately, now we're within a year of the next election cycle. I just don't see how there's enough time for anybody to get a party registered, including getting the signatures verified, and then get their constituency association set up. They may run as independents, which is fine, but is that really representing the party? I don't know. So what we've decided to do is, really the only thing we can do with the time that's allotted is regroup, get even more organized, get even stronger, and be ready for a challenge in the next few years. I don't hold a lot of doubt the UCP is probably going to rise into power and hopefully undo some of the issues that have been created by the NDP. But unfortunately, that's not going to be enough. I know so many people are putting so much faith in this UCP party rising to power. But you need to consider this. Alberta doesn't control the policies of Canada. The federal government does. And with that, and if you look in the Constitution Act and other various government sources of information you can turn to, Alberta doesn't control waterways and a lot of other things. It doesn't obviously control federal taxes. Therefore, the federal government is always going to be, I got some mosquitoes buzzing around here, the federal government is always going to be in the background. They're going to be adding their taxes, their rules, and their regulations to virtually anything that happens, not just in Alberta, but across the country. Unfortunately, these days, their focus is Alberta, which takes us to where we are now. We've been hit with a double whammy. Liberal policies and the failing NDP. So if and when, and I would say when, we do see the rise of the UCP, fine. They can undo many things that the NDP has done. There are some things I question. No politician likes to take away from the money that was created by a party before them. Let me give you an example, the GST. How many parties said they would get rid of the GST, but once they got into power, they realized it was a money pit and nobody really wants to get rid of it. I don't think anything or many things will be reduced in that aspect, even with the UCP. But the greater issues that we have to look at is this, is Canada on a whole. Sure, our province can create an economically friendly place to invest money, but there is always going to be that shadow of the federal government hanging over us. They control the waterways. Our waterways are shut down on the west coast. If, as so many people say, oh well, we could go to Churchill. Let's build a pipeline to Churchill. And let's say we could get through the native reservation lands in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, because that's mainly what we'd be dealing with, and finally make it to Churchill and start pumping oil into Churchill. The government could turn around the next day and say, well, we're shutting this waterway down. They could do that. So what good would that do us? We're controlled by the federal government. And I know there's people that don't want to believe this. They believe that this UCP or whoever else except for NDP gets in to control Alberta will be able to fix this. They can't. It's not their jurisdiction. So we're faced with this dilemma. Now, as an investor, let's take some of the larger ones. BP, for instance, pulls out a few months ago, simply because there's more, I think in their words, economically friendly places to invest their money in the world. Suncor, Cenovus, how many others could we mention, are doing the same thing. And once you remove money, once you go through the process of saying yes, it's always hard to make that decision, but once you make the decision, it's even harder to go back on it. So once you've made that decision to move as they have, how do you get them back? Well, you can't simply say, well, we have a province here that's going to invite you back. Any investor is going to say, well, what about the provincial the federal regulations? What about these regulations? What about building pipelines? What about taxes? How can we be competitive? And we can't. We simply can't. It's not the jurisdiction of the provincial party. They can't do anything about it. We could lower taxes to 5%. Federal government could say, well, we're increasing them to 50%. We'd still be liable to pay for that. We could move our oil down to the border of Montana, snubbing our nose at the federal government, saying, well, we've got a deal now with Montana, so thanks but no thanks. We don't need your approval for pipelines to cross into another provincial jurisdiction. The government could turn around and say, well, that's fine, but for every drop of oil that leaves Canada, we're taxing. So again, we're back to being controlled by the federal government, and it's just not a good place to be in, as many of you, have started to figure out. Now let's look at it on a personal level. Every year we pay, well, most of us pay income tax, and on average, each Albertan pays about $6,000 into the federal general revenue fund. That's where your income tax goes. And it's out of that fund that the equalization payments, or some of you still call them transfer payments, that's where they originate. It isn't that at sometime in the year Alberta just writes a check for 19 or $20 billion. It's what you pay into income tax and our industries here pay into income tax. And the offset is we pay, on average, $6,000 more than what we get back. So that's how we arrive at Alberta paying so much more into the equalization formula. People will say, well, if we left, what would we do? Where would we get our money? Well, what if we kept an average, a small average of $15 billion every year? What if we kept that in the province? What would $15 billion buy us this year alone? Our unemployment would be down to zero. We would have the best education, I dare say, in the world. We would have the best health system probably in the world. We'd be putting money into research and development. There's so many things we could do if we controlled that money and didn't give it away, because essentially that's what we do. We give it away. So if you want to know what that's really like, you get home tonight, look next door, and walk over and hand your neighbor a $6,000 check and see how that feels. Because that's essentially what you're doing. Better yet, drive across the city into an area you don't even know, and just walk up to some random door and hand them $6,000, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're not getting it back. So if you were to think of it this way, if we were to leave, we'd have about $15 billion surplus. It's quite possible every Albertan would get a check every year just for living here. So who knows what that could amount to. We know that we had, a few years ago, we had the Ralph bucks, but that could be perpetual. So not only would our taxes be half of what they're paying now, if you pay $6,000, I think, just off the top of my head, if you pay about $6,000 to the federal tax, you're paying $3,000 provincial. So you'd be left with about a third of the taxes that you normally pay. Now, I could stand corrected on that, but I know our provincial taxes are substantially less than our federal taxes. So again, we would give ourselves a raise just in our home income. Our price of oil, if we were able to sell to the world market, our price of oil would rise about 30%. Right now we pay a discount, or we receive a discounted price simply because of our limited ability to reach other economies. So eliminating the federal regulations would allow us to get those pipelines built and extend our reach into world markets, and therefore, again, give ourselves about a 30% increase just in the price of oil alone. Those figures by themselves are mind-numbing if you stop and think what we could do with that money. It's incredible, really, what's available. So those are some of the issues we face on a minor level. Well, it's not really so minor when you're talking in billions of dollars, but those are some of the issues that we face and some of the benefits if we weren't relying, if that's the word you want to use, if we weren't under the thumb of Ottawa. Now, I want to talk on another subject here very, very quickly, simply because I don't want to do another video on it, and it's such a nice day out here. It's a little bit breezy, keeping the mosquitoes away for the most part. But another thing that I want to talk about is our alliances across Canada. We have worked hard, the AIM group and the WIPA group and now the Alberta Independence Party group. We've worked hard forging alliances with just about everybody in every province, both nationally and nationally and provincially. With AIM, I worked very, very hard in the last year and a half, understanding and learning about Quebec and how we could integrate with Quebec. And I know there's a lot of people that just right away they get upset when they hear about Quebec, but I want you to think about this for a second. There is no other province in Canada, besides probably Alberta and maybe Saskatchewan that wants out as bad. There is certainly no other province with the experience. Quebec has taken their province to a referendum. Many people complain because Quebec receives the money they do, and right or wrong, you need to understand the history of what happened there, and very quickly I'm going to give it to you. Quebec was winning their referendum back in the late 90s. The government of Canada knew this, and in the dying weeks leading up to the referendum, they went to the people of Quebec and said, if you stay, we will support your education, your daycare, and everything else that Quebec gets. And enough people decided yes, and it swung the referendum in the favor of the Canadian government by less than 1%, I might add. So it was still very, very close. A lot of people in Quebec to this day spit the word Trudeau. They abhor the Liberal Party, and they remember that they were bribed, and some to this day even consider that it was illegal what happened. Nonetheless, it happened, and Quebec started receiving money out of the Federal Equalization Fund, which, of course, a good portion of it comes from Alberta. It wasn't that they targeted Alberta. Nobody thinks at that time where the money's coming from. Whenever you hear you're getting money from the government, you just think, well, it's money from the government. You don't consider the source. But what we need to realize is this, is when people start saying, well, let Quebec go, they'll come crawling back, or, whatever they happen to say in that topic, they won't. Quebec developed something, and I'd encourage everybody to look it up if you haven't heard about it. It's called the James Bay Hydro Project. And on a world class, it's almost second to none. It's huge. And it could be expanded many times over. Quebec could, if they chose to do so, supply probably most, if not all, of the northeastern U.S., their power, plus their own. They essentially could heat their homes for nothing, sell the remaining power out to the eastern seaboard, and do probably not bad. But the other thing people don't know, many people are shocked, and again, you can look this up, but Quebec sits on the world's 5th largest proven natural gas reserves that lie under the St. Lawrence Basin. Now, they've even admitted to this, some of their politicians, some of their hardline politicians. So, no, if Quebec was forced to develop their resources, they would rival Alberta for wealth. Now, why don't they? This is the interesting thing. Back in the referendum, Quebec became dependent on the government. Much what the NDP would like to do here is have Albertans rely on the government. That's the goal of any socialist government, is to have the people rely on the government and therefore they control them. Well, over the years, Quebec has been successful in their provincial governments in keeping people relying on the governments. That's how they get into power. If some politician tried to claim power in Quebec and said, well, no, we're going to turn away from the equalization payments and we're going to start developing our own resources, their chances of getting elected would be slim to none. And really, at the end of the day, that's what matters to a politician. Get elected and stay elected. So you're not going to see that. However, there is a strong movement in Quebec that does want to develop their own resources and does want to be truly independent and does want the wealth and the lifestyle that comes with it. They're held in check by their well-rooted provincial party, and we are trying to work with Quebec to help them break out from this cycle, simply because Quebec is willing to help us. I have lawyers follow me that are constitution specialists, professors actually, that teach in some of the universities there. And probably, I would say, no other province in Canada has the same type of lawyers in this quality that Quebec does. They've lived for separation all their life. I've had one of the lawyers send me some of his life's work explaining how this could be done. And I call him friend, and we communicate regularly. He has actually said to me at one time that he actually thought Alberta would be the first to leave Confederation, which I thought was very interesting. There is a group, there are several groups in Quebec, there's numerous groups in Quebec actually, that every time I post in there, I'm well received. They cannot believe that there's actually support in Western Canada. And if we could bring everybody together to work together, because working apart just, well, how's that worked out for us in the last 20 years? They say the definition of insanity is, and I'm sure you know how to finish that sentence, it's time to look at something different. If we were to group together, work together, plan together, that would be the last thing Ottawa would want to hear. And all we need is one province to open the door, and the rest follow. If it was Quebec, and some people say, oh, well, Quebec would double cross us. Well, you know what? I could live with that, simply because if they did double cross us on the way out the door is still open. And we'd be out right behind them. And I dare say Saskatchewan would probably be right beside us. And soon we'd be together as a province again, the way it was intended to be. So the worst case scenario is Quebec would double cross us, but leave the door open for us to walk out. The best case scenario is Quebec helps us, we walk out, and we help them, and become good trading partners. But as far as us being part of Quebec, that's never going to happen. Quebec knows it, we know it. They will revert to their French language, will remain English. They would ideally have their own nation in North America. We would have ours, no different than Cuba, the U.S., Mexico. We would all be independent. We'd all be our own country. So people get worried thinking they don't want to be a part of Quebec. Well, we wouldn't be. All we're looking for is friendships. So I say to that, somebody looks back to the Second World War in England, and of course the U.S. got into it a little bit later, which certainly helped us because we weren't really doing all that well until the U.S. entered the war. But it still wasn't guaranteed until Germany attacked Russia. And Russia, who today we call an enemy and probably always have, became an ally. And together, friends and foe, we defeated a greater foe. And when the war was over, everybody went their own way. Russia is still Russia. We're still Canada. The U.S. is still Canada. We, in most cases, don't see eye to eye with the Russians. But they did help us. And it can work the same way. So what we need to do is we need to open our eyes, and we need to look at all our options. So where do we go from here? We're going to continue building this party. I don't think that there's any cause to ask people to go out right at this moment and collect signatures and keep repeating mistakes. We need to increase the membership, so I encourage everybody to share the videos and share the information and help us grow this membership. Eventually we're going to find somebody who can take us to a new level. And with that direction, we have lots and lots of time to register a party and perfect it and not be forced into a short timeline and make how many mistakes. So we want to do this right. The first time we learned about apathy. We just learned a lot. The second time we learned even more. Unfortunately, one of the things we learned was trust really isn't high priority when it comes to politics. We'll make some amendments to that. We won't be backstabbed again. And forward we continue. We have to. If we don't get something done here in a few short years, it's just going to be too late. We're going to be too far in debt. I'm looking at one of the scarier things I'm looking at right now, and I sure pray to the good Lord that either the Liberal Party or the NDP is not in power when this happens. But the province of Ontario, with our tax system the way it is and the Ontario debt the way it is, Ontario's losing in they're hemorrhaging in their industries right now. They're fleeing back to the U.S. We hear now that there's going to be something that Trump's come up with the auto industry, which is going to affect Ontario. And you've got to know that it's going to be good for the U.S. I mean, I can't fault Trump. That's what he was elected to do. It's his country, and he's got a responsibility to his people, not ours. So if he can get a better deal, he's going to do it. Unfortunately, a better deal is going to cost us in Canada, and specifically in Ontario. But the greater threat is this. What's going to happen with this debt that Ontario has? 300 and, depending on what, where you source the information, it's as high as $321 billion. That's really scary. Ontario has one of the oldest workforces in Canada that's retiring faster than anybody in Canada, and it's being replaced by a young workforce. Now the old workforce is retiring with $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 incomes, and is being replaced by $15 an hour incomes. It's not going to support the pension plan. Ontario's going to go broke. I know it's a bold statement, but they can't afford their debt now, and they continue to add on to it. And Lord help them if the NDP gets in there. But Ontario's going to go broke. Now, there isn't anybody that likes to live under a form of receivership and be governed by all these rules and restrictions. Ontario is going to turn to the provincial, or sorry, well, maybe their provincial government, certainly the federal government, because they have more money, or access to more money. And they're going to tell them, not ask them, they're going to tell them that they want help. And the federal government is going to do it, simply because if they don't, Ontario will reject them and elect a government that will. Now, where is any government in Canada, provincial or otherwise, going to find $300+ billion to help out their people? There's only one place. There's only one place with that cash. And that's your $1 trillion resource industry that lies in Alberta. So if you think that right now we're imposed with taxes and restrictions, wait till Ontario goes broke. And wait till they come crawling, their politicians, well, I'm not even going to say come crawling, come demanding a bigger piece of the action. What's our provincial politician going to do? The one that's sitting at the time, no matter who he is. What's he going to do? How's he going to say no? He can't. You can't. It's written into the pseudo-constitution. The Constitution that isn't a constitution. And I'm not going to talk about that now, but those are some of the challenges we face. Those are some of the reasons that we need to get out. It's not a matter of, it's not animosity, it's common sense. Those of you that have kids, their kids are about to have grandchildren, they're never going to see another payday, another decent payday. There isn't an industry, there's not an industry in the world that is going to come running back to Alberta. I don't care if the UCP gets in or any other party we haven't heard of, until the restrictions are broken by Ottawa. Because they know as soon as they plant anything, the taxes that Ottawa imposes upon them are going to be more than anywhere else in the world. And they're going to be able to go and get a better return for their money elsewhere in the world. So until we claim autonomy, get used to it, people, because this is the way you're going to live. I'm sorry to bring the good news on such a great day. So I'll end saying I hope everybody has a great day, something to think about. Hope I wasn't too long-winded, but I'm sure now, coming on to half an hour in a video, you can understand why I didn't want to type this. Anyway, we're here. We're not going anywhere. We're counting on your support, sharing the posts. Liking is one thing, but sharing is what really counts. Let's continue to build this membership, and let's get some quality people helping us out, and let's get a leader. So again, thank you all for your time. Have a great day.